everybody, and welcome to Kissing the Cod, All Things Gold. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Peter Dimmell. Peter, welcome.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.
I'm honored to have you here today for a nice conversation. And you've got quite an illustrious career. And I don't know where to start. So maybe let's just start at the beginning. You were born in the United Kingdom.
That's correct. Yes, my mom was a war bride, born in 1946, just after the war, and went 5 times back and forth across the Atlantic by ocean liner before I was 10. So, and subsequent to that, we lived in Canada the rest of the time. And my dad was in the Army. After the war, he got out, but then he got back in again. He became a sergeant, a recruiting sergeant, actually, in Ontario, and happened to pass through Bancroft a lot. And Bancroft is a mineral capital of Canada. He started bringing. I had found a small quartz crystal that my grandfather, I guess, had from the Epsom Downs in the UK, and I got intrigued with that. And my dad started bringing me back things from Bancroft, rocks, minerals, pretty well everything. And that's how I started. From then on, I wanted to be a geologist.
Wow! So your dad was a sergeant in World War II?
Yes, he was what they call a recruiting sergeant. He would be the guy that would go around to the various communities, usually talk to the barbers at that time, people that knew the people that were applying to join the armed forces.
Interesting. My great grandfather was a sergeant, World War I, World War II, served in the Queen's Guard. And I remember the stories when I was young about the trips across the ocean or the pond. Correct?
Yeah, the pond. Yeah.
So what's it like being on an ocean liner? Now we're so, we complain with an 8-hour flight that the seats are too uncomfortable. But what's it like on an ocean liner?
Well, at that particular time, I think it was about a week to get from the UK to somewhere in Canada. It could be Montreal, it could be Halifax, etc. And the reason we went back was my mother, as I say, was born in the UK. She got homesick, so we went back twice. Once when Dad went to the UK to reassign, and once when he went to Germany. So during the war, he was actually an anti-aircraft gunner on the coast, on the east coast of the UK, and that's what he did. He was in the artillery at the time.
Where on the east coast?
I think he met my wife somewhere in the Clacton area, Clacton-on-Sea in Essex, and that's where I was born.
Okay. My father-in-law was a navigator on a B-17, and he was based out of the UK, and I've seen a lot of amazing pictures and met a lot of amazing veterans over the years.
I think the interesting thing about it is that a lot of the people that were in the war, now Dad didn't really see much of the, they were shooting at planes, but the planes weren't shooting back at them in a lot of cases. But I think, people during the war, I don't think most of us could really understand what they went through. We're seeing a lot of these things now, of course, with what's going on in Ukraine. And I think it's really bothering most of us. It's just seeing these things going on, seeing how inhumane people can be to each other.
Yeah. We ended up sponsoring bomber reunions for the B-17, and as time went on, incorporated other groups because there's fewer and fewer. And very, very fortunate to hear some stories. And I think my favorite one was they were hit. The plane was hit. They had to evacuate, and the gentleman from the U.S. was landed in a farmer's field in Germany, and broke his leg. And the family took him in, and they hid him for the remainder of the war because they knew what would happen if they turned him in. So they kept him there and healed up his leg and fed him. And when the war ended, they helped him get home. In all that inhumanity, there's
Yes, sir. That's right. There always is. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the other is what comes through in a lot of people during times like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you ended up in Bancroft.
No, I didn't end up in Bancroft. That was where I got my
Yeah.
rocks from. Yes. Dad passed through there. I was living in southern Ontario, a place called Deseronto, which is in between Kingston and Belleville on the Bay of Quinte, which is an offshoot of Lake Ontario. And I went to 4 high schools because Dad moved around a lot: Deseronto, Kingston, Fredericton, and then Camp Borden, north of Toronto. So I had as I say to people, I know very few people that I actually went to high school with because I moved around too much and of course didn't keep in touch. So, but that sort of thing, it makes you who you are. I know when I went to Kingston, I was very introverted. I took part in very little. When I went to Fredericton, I made a conscious decision because I did grade 11 and 12 there, conscious decision that I had to become more outgoing. And I think that getting involved with things like Glee Club, High Y at the time, a bunch of different situations like that, that I got over my shyness. I became, I guess, a lot of what I am now today because I'm certainly not introverted anymore. And most people that know me will know that. I tend to speak up probably too much.
I love it. I love it. You have been quite involved in the mining industry as well. And we'll get into all of the stuff in Newfoundland and the amazing things you've done. But one thing that struck me about your career is how involved you are in so many organizations over the years. And, why so much? You've been incredibly busy. PDAC, Canadian Institute of Mines, Mining Hall of Fame, Newfoundland and Labrador Chamber of Mines, so much.
Well, I guess, I've always thought that, if you believe in what you're doing, if you believe in the industry that you're working in, you have to try and do the best you can to make that industry the best it can be. And that means working with other industry groups. It means working with governments a lot. And it also means speaking up for people that otherwise might not get their concerns put forward. I've always considered myself a prospecting geologist. I've worked with prospectors all my life. And a lot of the success I've had have been related to the prospectors I've worked with. Guys like Al and Ted Keats originally with Noranda. In New Brunswick, I worked with guys like George Murphy and a lot of the other New Brunswick prospectors in there. And I've always seen the success that companies have when they work with prospectors, but it's a combined thing. It's prospectors and geologists working together. I taught prospecting courses too for the government here for quite a while. Again, volunteer type thing. But one of the things I always said to prospectors, I said, you guys have such an advantage over us geologists. I said, you don't know anything. And they look at me and they go, and I said, well, you can go in places that we would never go because we know there's nothing there. And then you guys go in and find something. And I said, because we're so smart, we go in and explain why it's there, but we don't find it. That's the bottom. We bottom line is that the prospectors are the guys that go. They have ideas. They look at the data. They do different things. And Voisey's Bay is a good example. Nobody was looking in Labrador because you couldn't find a copper nickel deposit in Labrador. It just wasn't the right environment. So
Wow.
But 2 prospectors found it. It was just a big rusty hill on the side of Voisey's Bay, right?
Wow. What were the prospectors that found Voisey's Bay?
Al Chislett and Chris Verbisky.
Okay.
And again, they were up there looking for diamonds. That's what they were. That's why the company that made Discovery is called Diamond Fields. One of our major companies that have been around here. They were looking for diamonds, but because they're prospectors, they kept their eyes open. And Voisey's Bay, the Discovery Hill, it's called Discovery Hill for a reason, was a big rusty Gossan zone. that incidentally had been noted by Bruce Ryan, who works with the Newfoundland government. He had a sample of that gossan, I think in 1986, on display at the Newfoundland Open House. And nobody really paid any attention to it. But the guys went in there in 93, 92, 93, and flying over it in a helicopter one day, spotted it and said, we'll come back and have a look at that later. And when they came back, they thought they'd found a copper deposit because they went down through the gossan, which is the iron oxide on top. And they found chalcopyrite first, and they saw other stuff which looked like pyrrhotite, but it was turned out to be pyrrhotite and pentlandite, which is the nickel sulfide. So it's you keep your eyes open. That's what prospectors do, and that's how they find things.
Yeah, look for something that doesn't belong.
Well, that's part of it, yeah. But rusty, any iron, most of the things that we do, any of our minerals usually have iron associated with them, and iron rusts, and so you look for gossans. That's one of the first things you did. Now, having said that, I spent next year or so, I guess after that, off and on, working with companies in Labrador, looking for more of these rusty zones, and we found lots of rusty zones. We just didn't find any nickel, or copper.
Okay. So explain how do you explain the difference between a prospector and a geologist?
Well, a geologist, first of all, has had 4 or 5 years of university training in not only geology, but there's so many facets of geology. There's paleontology, which is the fossils and things. Structural geology, which gives you an idea of structure and how folds happen and the sort of situation you need for those type of things. Mineralogy, the type of minerals you're seeing, what they mean. That's how I got into geology. When I was telling you, as a rock collector, I became, as such, an amateur mineralogist. I'm still very good at identifying minerals. And that's because I studied that sort of thing when I was a kid. And I read, I got books on minerals, because you can get Powell's Field Guide to Rocks and Minerals, which is still a standard for anybody in that is in the mineral, looking at minerals and collecting minerals and that sort of thing. And then sedimentology, how things form, all of these things fit together, and more to the point, what we study is economic geology, and that's putting most of these things together, the other facets of it, and then using those, tying in geophysics, tying in geochemistry, and these things. And I call it geochemistry, geophysics, etc., because that's what we use to find the deposits. And it's a matter of putting those all together. Now, prospectors don't have that training. In most cases, they're either self-taught or they've taken a 1 or 2 week course. And so you know what type of thing you can get a good basic for it. But again, prospectors to me are made in a lot of cases. They're not necessarily born. They go out, they start breaking rock and looking at it, seeing what's going on. Why does this look different? You just said that. Why are things different? And I say that when I involved in the prospecting course. If you've got all red rocks and all of a sudden you see a green one, why is it green? It's usually green if they're red because they're oxidized and they have iron. The iron's oxidized in them. When it's green, it's usually because it's reduced. And when you get reduction, the fluids that cause that can carry gold, silver, and other minerals, and that's what happens to it. Right? So that's how you use those things. So prospectors can do it, but they do it on a much simpler level, if you want to call it. Mineral exploration to me is like it's like a detective story. You use the clues that you can pick up from all of those facets, from the government data, from work you've done yourself in geochemistry, work you've done in geophysics, if you have, going underground, looking at the structure. The Appleton Fault Zone, for example, which is Newfound Gold's main one. It's interesting because it was never really known. And we haven't got into my career yet, but I worked out of Gander, Newfoundland, from 1969 to 1982.
Wow.
And every week we would leave Gander. We would leave on a Monday and we would go west. So we would go right across the Appleton Fault Zone. But we never thought about it because we weren't looking for gold, number one. But also it didn't mean anything to us at the time, right? So, but recognizing that was a fault, and it wasn't on the map as a fault. It's interesting because the grub line was known, and some of these other ones that are now, the main ones that people are looking at. But the Appleton Fault Zone really was not shown as a fault structure, even though it was very obvious if you looked at it topographically. It had two long linear ponds in it. Gander River came along, followed it. You can actually trace it right down to Gander Lake. And as far as we know, as far as Newfound Gold is saying, you can actually trace it to the south of the lake. So of Gander Lake, that is. So, it's recognizing these things, using those clues and putting them together.
So I want to ask the question, you don't have to answer it. Who's discovered more mines, prospectors or geologists?
I'd say in Newfoundland, prospectors, many more. You just go through them. Matty Mitchell was the one who discovered the Buckins deposit. It wasn't, he got a bag of flour as a reward, right? Al Keats has been involved with, and I've been involved with him through most of these too. Point Leamington deposit, which is probably the largest massive sulfide deposit in the island of Newfoundland. I estimate it 30 to 40 million tons. It's still not a mine. It was found in 1971.
Wow.
And I was working with Noranda at the time, and Al found a massive sulfide boulder about a quarter mile away from a Phelps Dodge airborne anomaly that had been flown in 1967, but they'd done a quick follow-up but hadn't done anything with it. And I accompanied Al in to look at that area. It was mafic volcanics in contact with felsic volcanics, with some black shale and stuff along the contact. But the massive sulfide had fragments of the rhyolitic rocks in them. There were outcrops of that same mineral, and that airborne was right there. I'd say about a month to 2 months after Al found that boulder, when he was a stream sediment sampling was what he was doing. He didn't even have an axe. He was using rocks to break. That's how he brought out a chunk of it. Anyway. A month later, we drilled it, and we got 240 feet of massive sulfides in the first hole. So it's still not a mine, mainly because it's very, very difficult. It's very fine grained. It was about 1% copper in that 240 feet was about 1% copper. There is a zinc zone there that's probably 3 or 4 million tons. So people are still working on it, obviously. But that was 1971. Wow. Tally Pond, Al found a boulder outside the camp. A bulldozer pushed it over the bank, and it was massive chalcopyrite this time, about this big. Subsequently to that, we found the boundary deposit. This is all Noranda stuff, right? Yeah. And we found the boundary deposit, and in 1986 or 87, they actually drilled the main duck pond deposit. But our second drill hole in that area was actually, and again, I was on the drill and all this stuff, so this stuff I was on the shores of Duck Pond. And we hit stringer mineralization then. So we always knew there was something around there. We just didn't quite know where it was. And it was, again, combination. Wayne Reed did some downhole geophysics, a geologist. And he said, look, alteration is increasing downhole on a hole that I had drilled. And I moved on to New Brunswick, I think, at that time, just did some work. And another geologist extended that hole on down into the massive sulfides. That's how they found that one. So. Wow. It goes on, and most of these things are found like that. Other ones are found by geochemistry, like Daniels Harbor, and there's the zinc mine there and stuff. But yeah, I could go on, but anyway.
Well, I'm fascinated by prospectors, the personality, the optimism, the combination of skills that they've had to acquire, and just something they can see something, right? Like they're like you say, they're made, but they're fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, they are, and I'll just tell you another story about Al, and this is during the Tally Pond, Duck Pond stuff. Again, we were coming back. We've been doing some geophysics on the east side of Tally Pond, and walking along the shore. And Al said, just to me, he said, look, he said, the water's real low. He said, I've been looking at a boulder for the last 2 or 3 years, and it's always been in too deep water. Couldn't get, I think I can get out to it today. And he goes walking out like that, and he goes whack with the hammer. He comes in, he says, yeah, it's massive sulfides. I mean, we'd all walk by it, but no, it's like a sixth sense almost, right? Yeah. And I look at it, and I mean, I'm not a bad prospector myself, mainly because I've watched what these guys do, and the biggest thing they do is they break rock. You can't see what's going on. And it's Newfoundland, especially because you've got a lot of iron, manganese in the streams and stuff, and that's one of the best places to prospect. And you're not going to do it without breaking rock as you go, So.
Wow. Well, I want to get into the whole story, but first we should talk about your career. We just had to kind of go in, which I love, but I understand that initially your interest in what became a career in geology started with your dad and his contacts with barbers. There was a particular barber who brought some rocks for you.
Yeah, well, the barbers in Bancroft, a lot of the people in there were amateur mineralogists and rock collectors, whatever you want to call them. And one of them was one of the main barbers in Bancroft at the time. So he was a guy that my dad used to go see. So, and Dad mentioned one time, I guess, look, my son's interested in rocks. I said, well, so he started, like most people do when they're rock collectors, they have extra specimens. They say, well, here, you take some of these, and they were neat things. They were storolite crystals. They were kyanite crystals. They were, all of these things that you wouldn't necessarily see down in southern Ontario. But as you get up into northern Ontario, you get in a place like Bancroft, especially. I mean, it's known. It's almost as good as some of the best places in the world for mineral specimens. So I ended up with quite a collection. I didn't really have it in any fancy way, but it just inspired me because I got so interested in it.
Wow. And then you ended up going to university and studying geology?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I went to UNB in Fredericton and 4-year degree, major in geology. And just went on from there. In first year, I worked with the geology department at UNB. We did a little bit of field work out on Grand Manan Island in the Bay of Fundy, and I did a lot of work in the lab actually at UNB. Second year, I worked with the Geological Survey of Canada doing regional mapping in central New Brunswick, what they called the McKendrick Lake map sheet. And that actually was quite interesting. We went for days sometimes without seeing rocks. And this is pre-GPS, of course, so we just go on a compass course. And most of the time we didn't know where we were, but we knew how to get out. So we go on a compass course. I think the longest one we did 6 kilometers in, and then 1 kilometer along a stream, and then 6 kilometers out, and then went in from a road, came out from a road. And except for the time we were on the stream or at the road, we really didn't know where we were. I mean, because we were pacing and flagging and just waiting till we hit this stream. Third year, I had 6 job offers. And one of them was, the first one was offered was McIntyre Porcupine. Another company doesn't exist anymore in Newfoundland. They were doing a drill program following up an airborne survey, a series of airborne surveys in central Newfoundland. And that's the one I took. But I was also offered jobs with Inco, I forget, Iron Ore Company of Canada, whatever. Anyway, the one I took was the lowest paid because it was the first I was offered. But it got me into Newfoundland, which is quite interesting, and central Newfoundland. So I got to know it. Next year, when I was offered 2 jobs. At the end of 1969, I was offered 2 jobs, one with Noranda, one with Inco. Inco would have been in Sudbury during the winter, and summertime I'd be out doing field work somewhere. Noranda was in Newfoundland, Gander, Newfoundland. They were establishing an office there. Ron Hawks, who had been in the Bathurst office, was put over there. And he was putting a group together. So he said, oh, you've been to Newfoundland? Yeah. And what do you think? I said, well, yeah, I enjoy it. So he offered me a job. He said, well, we'll see how it goes over the summer. Anyway, 17 years later, they got rid of me, but it was 17 years, of quite interesting stuff, all in Newfoundland. Yeah.
Noranda did a lot of amazing initial work that's provided a lot of the base that people are following up now. Correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Yep. Very good. Yeah. But the problem with Noranda, and it was always, to me, it was always too bureaucratic, and it became more bureaucratic as time went on. They started worrying too much about budgets. We had one boss at Noranda. I won't mention his name, but when he took over, he decided that the budgets, but at that time, just to put it in perspective, we had 21 districts across the country. This is from east to west, 21 districts, 4 regions. Okay. We had each district had a district geologist and 1 or most times 2 or maybe more project geologists. So just put those together. You're probably talking, and in each district had a manager and assistant manager. So you add up all those things, you got like 80 or 90 or 100 people. And my district was at that time, it was Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. And that was when I was in Bathurst. I moved to Bathurst in 82. And I came back to St. John's with another company in 89. But my budget at that time was probably $500,000 or $600,000 a year. And of course, at that time, that wasn't a bad budget. And well, even today, if you can get it as a junior, that's not too bad a budget when you start off. But anyway, this boss decided what he was going to do to make sure budgets were being adhered to and things. He was going to do a variance. The variance was if you had a $50,000 budget and you spent $40,000, that was a $10,000 variance. If you had a $50,000 budget and you spent $60,000, that was still a $10,000 variance. Now going over is usually, okay, that's something, but going under is usually not considered a variance. You don't worry. And one would cancel the other. So within a budget, you'd work it as a professional geologist. That's what you should be doing. You should be managing your money to the best. So if it wasn't worth it while spending an extra 10 there, but it was worth here, will you go do it, right? Anyway, he took that ability away. And what he said was, and at the end of the year, he added it up, and whoever had the best variances were the ones that got the bonuses, right? Well, what I noted very quickly was the ones that got the good variances spent all their time managing their budgets and not friggin' exploring. The ones that found everything were the guys that had the worst budgets, worst variances, because they weren't spending any time managing their budgets. They were spending time spending the money wisely and finding things. So, it was silly that what was done. And unfortunately, you get into those things and it happens. In New Brunswick, for example, we were actually spending Noranda was spending Brunswick Mining and Smelting dollars because of Brunswick Mining and Smelting had the mine. Every dollar they spent in exploration was only they could get the value back against their profits was 11-cent dollars that Bathurst, Brunswick was spending. So, the year I got laid off, I had the year before in our budget meetings, I had the #1 project in Atlantic Canada. Brunswick came up with $100,000 or something, like I said, to go drill it. And I said, we're not ready to drill it. We haven't done geophysics. We haven't done proper geochem. We haven't done this. We haven't done that. Haven't done the other thing. Anyway, I said, doesn't matter. We're going to go drill it. And it won't matter. It won't mean anything anyway. And one of the other geologists said to me, you must be really happy with that. I said, no. I said, I'll be happy if we hit something. If we don't hit anything, that project's done. Anyway, sure enough, went in, didn't get much, a meter of, 2 or 3 grams or 4 grams or something like that in the drilling. Anyway, that spring I got laid off.
What you bring up is a really valid point. People's expectations and desire to drill too quickly. And the market feeds into this. People want immediate results. They don't really understand what we do and how long it takes to get to that point where need, where you can drill and have a successful or meaningful outcome. I find it frustrating because the short-term investment mentality is out there.
Yes, and that is unfortunately one of the big problems with the junior sector. But you see, that's the thing. It shouldn't have been like that with companies like Noranda that had $20 million, $10 million budgets every year anyway. Well, what they should have been doing is they should have been letting the people they hired to do the work do it. Another example I have of a Noranda thing here, and I got a lot of Noranda stories, but when I went to New Brunswick, the first thing I did, I think I went there in September, and I went down to the government open house, in the Brunswick open house in October, I think. And the regional geologist in southern New Brunswick, Art Rutenberg, gave a talk on gold in southern New Brunswick. And I said, okay, that's very interesting. So I went to see him afterwards. Any chance of me taking me down, showing me some of this stuff the next week? He said, oh yeah, come on down, I'll take you down. And he took me down, and we went down around St. John, New Brunswick, a place called Gordex. The place is actually being explored again right now. And anyway, I went back went back and started writing it up. We had to do monthly reports, and every month I'd write it. And I followed up with it, following the company called Gordex. Peggy Wittek Development was working with them at the time. That's where I first met Peggy, and at the time, her husband, Bill. They were working on that, but there was another property right alongside of it called Milligan Lake, and that was owned by a so-called prospector. I mean, he just was his land more than anything else, but similar geology things. So I went back and I started writing it up and saying we should option this and we should do this and things like this. So anyway, because of the PESM connection at that time, the next thing I heard, a company called Bullet Energy was going to option the property. They were going to do everything, but that was the next spring. But anyway, I've been writing this up, talking about what they're doing and everything else. And I got one day, I guess it was in March or April the following year. This is the fall before. The assistant manager came in to me and he said, yeah, just been talking to Toronto. He said, they're really pissed off. He said, how come you didn't know? Because there was a big story apparently in the Globe and Mail about Gordex and this thing in southern New Brunswick. He said, we're really pissed off. He said that, we're here in New Brunswick, we don't know anything about it. I said, Ian, tell them to read my monthly reports for the last 4 months, and they'll know everything they want to know about it. But that was two things. That was, first of all, Toronto. We had to send our monthly reports to go to Toronto, obviously never looked at. It was also our manager and assistant manager who didn't consider it important enough to put it in their report, which went to Toronto, which would have been read, right? So that is the type of thing that really causes problem. I came back here to Newfoundland in 1989 with a company called the Krinor Corporation. I was over here in '88 as a consultant for them. And then I came over in '89, and to '92, I was regional geologist for Krinor for Newfoundland and Labrador. So we did a bit of work in Labrador too. But it was a completely different thing there. I reported directly to Toronto. I got involved, the Pine Cove deposit, which is now called the Point Roos thing with Anaconda Gold. That they had 11 holes in at the time. A company called Varna Gold had 11 holes into it. They'd run out of money. They owed a whole bunch of money to the drilling company. And I went in, had a look at it. I called Toronto to my boss and I said, we should take this. This is a gold deposit here. I could see it. I mean, every hole in the first 11 hit hole, I think it was 200 meters long then. So it's a gold deposit. I said, it may not be huge, but it's a gold deposit. First big one that's been found, or first one that's for any significance found in Newfoundland. And anyway, the next week he came, my boss came down, and the President, Vice VPX came down. The two of them came down, and we had a deal done the next week. Noranda was drilling the property right next door. They hadn't even looked at it at that point. So, you've got to have ability. First of all, you got to have bosses trusting you and saying, okay, I'm hiring you to do a job, go do the job. right? Here's the guidance, but do it within those circumstances, and then listen to you if you say you've got something interesting. Oh.
Yeah, the person in the field, right?
Yep.
Looking at the rock. So how long were you with Corona?
Well, it was only 3 years. It started off with Lacana. With Ed Thompson was president of Lacana at the time. I think he resigned about the time I got involved with him. It was 88. That's when we were in Newfoundland first. And that's actually when I got involved to the Rambler South property, which is the area where I still have my claims. We flew an airborne down there, and then we found some gold mineralization and stuff. But we didn't have we were doing, it was VMS exploration, volcanogenic massive sulfides mainly, because looking for another Rambler style deposit. To date, nothing like that has been found except in the Rambler area itself, right out by the Lessee Road. But there's a lot of gold in that country. And we didn't have a lot of luck. We did a big till survey, but we didn't have any luck in following it up. Subsequent to that, I did follow it up, and 17 years later, I found the source of that big till thing, and I still have one claim over it. So,
and what is the source?
It's a zone called the SB zone. It is a big structure running up through the Packet Harbor Group. In a northeast direction, or northeast direction, I guess. And right on the south end of it, there was a big till anomaly, went about 3 kilometers. You could follow it. But the till went like this, and it also had things going like this. The ice direction was thought to be this way, but the ice direction actually was 160, and then there was some movement that way. So but it took 17 years. It isn't huge, but I think we had 17 meters of 1.4 grams. We had 1 meter and a half and 9.2 grams. Silver Spruce optioned it from me subsequent and did some more drilling on it. We didn't have a lot of luck in the drilling, but I think it does need more work. So, but it took 17 years to follow it up. Wow. Four different times with ODM. And
Corona was taken out by
Homestake. Homestake, yeah.
Okay. So, I have to show you something. This is
okay. You've actually been to the mine?
My husband has. This is his hat. So
okay, right. Yeah.
He actually got it from the guy that started the McLaughlin mine.
Okay, yes, yeah.
California.
I actually have a history book on the Homestake, including the talk of the Homestake mines, but that thick. I don't know whether you've seen it or not.
I don't
know. I think it was Nora Ullman did that book. Okay. Anyway, I don't know how I got a copy. I think Nora might have given it to me, but anyway.
Incredible project.
Yes, certainly was. Yeah, and still is, I guess. So yeah.
So there's gold in Newfoundland.
Yep.
This is where I want to go a little bit for right. We're kind of rambling around, but that's okay. We'll come to Rambler eventually. Modern day, extremely rare situation we find ourselves in.
Yes.
How did we get here?
Well, again, it's the lack of mineral exploration in Newfoundland and Labrador too. Labrador is a special case, but Newfoundland with its geology. It probably is. It's a function. The main function of lack of exploration here is the lack of interest. People in Toronto, Vancouver, Central Canada, in anything east of Montreal. I mean, or anything east of Quebec, I probably should say. I've been told that, and I've heard that many times. I was told years ago, for example, before they found the Brunswick mine, everybody was saying there's nothing east of Quebec, there's nothing east of Quebec, you're never going to find anything. And then they found Brunswick, and they said, well, okay, there's nothing east of Quebec except Brunswick. And then, of course, now comes Voisey's Bay. Well, these are world-class deposits, but people in central Canada did not recognize it. And so nobody came down and really spent any time here. There were a few people, few companies going around, but they tended to be small, undercapitalized as usual. And if you didn't have any luck in the immediate part, you couldn't go and raise any more money, so you couldn't do anything. The other thing that was in Newfoundland was because of Newfoundland itself. exploration, because of the way Newfoundland was around the water. If you weren't close to the water, you really had very little ability to get inland to do anything. The infrastructure wasn't there. That meant the geological mapping, the just getting around was incredibly difficult. So that meant people didn't do it as much as they would do in other places. And so as transportation got better and access got better, then it changed. But the other thing was, of course, because of that, the government said, well, how are we going to get people here? The only way we're going to do that is we're going to give them huge, big concessions. And Sean Ryan talks about this really well. He's got a really good talk on that situation about the concession system. And when I lived there, when I came here in 1971, 69, I should say, the concession system was still going. And as a matter of fact, the Point Leamington deposit that I mentioned first there, that was actually on what we called a NALCO concession, Newfoundland Labrador Corporation. It's a little different than NALCOR we have today. But anyway, and there was we had another one down in La Poile. And these were huge concessions. They were like 600, 700 square kilometers. And there was lots of thing there. But you had commitments, but they were minimal commitments compared to what you would have in a staking situation. There were no prospectors here. Really no significant prospectors. Any prospectors that were here, for the most part, worked with companies. So Brennex used prospectors, for example, British Newfoundland Corporation. They were based in Springdale. They worked all over the island, but they worked mostly in Labrador. And at that time, it was looking for uranium and the Seal Lake area on copper and a bunch of things like that. But they were sort of one of the first ones that started doing regional work. They started doing geochemistry. They started doing some geophysics and things like that. So that was sort of the beginning of it. But again, they were using the concession system. Falconbridge had concessions. Texas Gulf Sulphur had concessions at that time. So it was a different situation. Once the concession system started moving out, and they started say you could always stake claims, but nobody was doing it. You had to ground stake them, of course, first of all, and it was pretty obtuse how to do it. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world to do, because I think the government really didn't know how to handle it because they didn't have anybody doing it. So once that started getting released, and all of those concessions were out of there, the reed lots were another thing that, and Sean talks about that too. The Reed Newfoundland Company put the railway in, and the government gave them all these reed lots all along the railways, all over the whole island. And so that made a difference too. Point Leamington, for example, the boundary deposit was on the south side. It was right on the boundary. It's called the boundary deposit because it was on the boundary between reed lot 234 and Crown land. It was staked by Noranda. So, and we actually knew that. So we had to try and do a deal. We knew it was going to be there. We couldn't drill it, of course, or anything, but we knew there was something there because it was an airborne, and we'd done some gravity in the area, so we knew it was significant. Anyway, we did a deal with Abitibi Price at the time, and that's how Noranda ended up with the boundary deposit. So, but all of these things, it just made it that much more difficult. Because of that, nobody was looking for gold too. Gold prices were down, of course, over those years. As they started picking up and the staking system came in, then you started getting people going out and starting to prospect. I'm just trying to think when the first prospecting course, I think the first prospecting course was in the late 80s, I think. I think they've had 22 or 23. So it would be around the end of the 80s, I guess, when the first one would be. That started, and at the time, they'd be putting out 20, 25 prospectors a year because it was quite interesting. And it was a 2-week course given in Stephenville. And I went to the first one, and I went to all except one, all of the ones that they've had. And they haven't had any for the last 5 years. I'm not sure what's going on with the government on that, because there is still interest, but they don't seem to want to do it unless there's, 15, 20 or something. They've got, get 10 or 12. But anyway, the point of it was, once prospectors started getting out there, they had access to these areas. The geological mapping got a lot better, so guidance was there. The government started doing the lake sediment geochemistry, which was easy to look at because they do a big area, and most of the lake sediments for gold were 1 or less, nothing. And you started getting 10 here, and 6 over there, and 15 over there, and stuff. And people would stake those, and they'd go in and they'd find some mineralization, and it would just keep going from there. So I think that's it. The exploration wasn't done, and then when you started getting the prospectors and the data, then it started going. Now, that was in the early days. It was, as you said, it was driven mostly by Noranda and a few other companies. And Noranda did some great work. And myself and Kevin and Al Keats benefited from that, because the northern part of the Queensway, the Queensway North, was Noranda had that done. They were drilling on the south side of the Trans-Canada, but they didn't drill on the north side of the Trans-Canada. In fact, they really didn't even follow up there. And when that ground came open, a long time after Noranda dropped it, because there was a dispute when the ground came open the first time, Kevin, Al, and I staked the ground. So we benefited from that, and so did Newfound Gold, obviously. So.
And amazing things happening in the past few years there, really driving what's now emerging on the island, I think.
Yeah, it is. And I think what people have said, structure now, and again, I keep going back to Sean, but I listened to Sean's talk at the PDAC, and its structure is so important in gold mineralization. So if you recognize a good structure, then and there's indications of gold along it, then it needs to be looked at it carefully. Not just let's go do a quick run across it and see if we can find anything. Let's look at it properly. Let's do some geochemistry. Let's do some geophysics. Let's do things. Geophysics, unfortunately, for gold is not that effective because there's nothing direct. What you're looking for is you've got a magnetic feature and you're looking for a mag low where a structure goes through it or something. Well, that's fine, but it doesn't show the gold is there unless there's geochemistry right on top of it. Then obviously you've got something pretty good. But the geochemistry is the thing. Till sampling in Newfoundland, I think that has really turned things around. My first experience with that was with ODM in 1989 when we did this work for Corona in south of Rambler, and I became a believer very quickly on it. And I still believe in it, and I tell everybody that's working here to make sure that's what they should be doing. Sean does it a little differently. Anybody that just does analyses, I think they're missing something. You can analyze for gold in tills, you can, but you don't know how far that gold traveled. And once you start look at gold grains, and you can see the distance traveled, how pristine they are, how far traveled they are, etc. And anybody that knows anything about gold, placer gold is usually flattened. It's just, if you look at a placer gold nugget, it's a nugget, but it doesn't look, it's gold colored and it's nice, but it's nowhere near like the pristine gold that you get in a quartz vein. And the little grains that come out of those quartz veins and other gold zones, when you're seeing those, if you're seeing 90% pristine grains, as ODM says, you're within 100 meters of your source. And that's true. I've seen it. And that's exactly what happened when we found that one, what's now called the SB zone. Traced it back. So.
Wow. You mentioned Sean's presentation a couple of times at PDAC, and when I was really sorry that's wasn't recorded, because I think it was one of his best presentations. So I have been talking to Sean, and I want to get him to redo the presentation on a podcast.
I think that would be really good, because he lays it out. He's doing it first of all from a prospector's point of view, number one, but he's going through how things happened, why they happened, and the result of those happenings. And that's so important, especially for other erstwhile prospectors. I had a call prospector this morning that I've been helping with some stuff, and he had sent me some information and said, what do you think about it? And I gave him some advice, which was, in a particular case, I said, I don't think there's a heck of a lot of interest, certainly not in the data you sent me. So I said, don't get carried away. And I said, if there's other areas in that, here's what to look for, things. And that's what you've got to do. You can't get carried away. You can't fall in love with your property just because you've got it.
Yeah.
You can't stake too much. That's the other problem. A lot of prospectors they'll stake 100 claims and they really can only work 10.
Yeah.
That type of thing. But point of it is that you've got to keep going, and you've got to use what you can, use other people's advice too. Most of us, we want to find a mine. So if we can help somebody else find a mine, it's still good, so it's part of it. But yeah, I think if we could get that on so that people right across this country can look at it, because what applies here applies in a lot of cases, even though it's specific to here, applies pretty well everywhere in this country.
Yeah, listening to Sean in that presentation, and I'm going to get him on here, and then listening to Rich Goldfarb, who looks at what's going on in Newfoundland from a global perspective.
Right.
They're saying the same things. They're looking at it from different ways, but it goes back to what you said about the importance of the Prospector Geologist team, right?
Yep. Yeah, it does. The regional, I think that's the other thing. I didn't really get into that a little while ago, but I think until plate tectonics came along, Newfoundland was not. Hank Williams, who's now in the Mining Hall of Fame, he was a prophet memorial. He was the one that used plate tectonics to explain Newfoundland as a geological entity, with the Avalon Zone in the east, the Avalon Zone going from Morocco over in Northeast Africa, right down into the Carolinas in the U.S. The North American Craton on the west side there, with all of that going over to up into UK, Scotland, Ireland, etc., and then going right on down again into the Carolinas, into that area and stuff. Everything in between was what Proto-Atlantic Ocean. Geologically we call it the Iapetus. And he actually put a thing in, and this is something only Newfoundlanders who think. He called it the Harry Hibbs effect. Have you heard of Harry Hibbs?
No.
Okay, a new thing now. Harry Hibbs was an accordion player, and the Harry Hibbs effect was. That's what happened. That's what happened in central Newfoundland.
I love it.
The Harry Hibbs effect. But that is why we have those. We had the orogenies, we had the mountain building, the volcanoes, the fluid flow that you needed, the big structures that were running through the Dog Bay line, the Gander River complex, the Appleton Fault, all of these ones, getting right on down to the Valentine Lake area and through. All of these things were as a result of this action and reactivation along those things, because it didn't just happen once; it happened over a number of years. And I think that especially once that one intersection that Newfound got, the number one intersection at 92 grams over 19 meters, that just showed what was potentially here. It was interesting because Marathon was merrily going on its way with their 5, 6, 8, who knows what they're going to have, but they're probably 5 million mint at least right now ounces on Valentine Lake. I don't think people in the rest of Canada recognize that. Or if they recognize it, well, yeah, it's Newfoundland. Who cares, right? So, but they weren't taking it seriously. But as soon as Newfound came out with that intersection, and Sokoman too, the first drill hole of Sokoman drilled when they took over Moosehead. Luckily, it was about a week before I became a director of Sokoman. 44 grams over 11 meters. Again, you just don't see these type of drill holes. I don't care where you are. So that was actually the first one that got Mr. Sprott involved. He was very, very close, very involved with Sokoman as soon as that came. And then, of course, Newfound comes on. And just keep in mind, Sokoman's here, Newfound's out here. I'm reversed for the things. But this is going east for me, right? Okay. The thing is with it, we're across strike. So this is a different structure. This is more probably the Valentine Lake structure coming up through. This is the stuff in the Queensway area, whatever it is, particularly the Appleton Fault in this case. So it's a different a different type of thing, but the rocks are the same. They look the same. Well, these are supposed to be Silurian. These are supposed to be Ordovician. So you're 100 million years apart, something like that. But the mineralization looks the same, and both of them look like Fosterville.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, people, I think, started saying, well, geez, maybe we should look at Newfoundland a little closer and get involved. And of course, since then, people are coming down and they're finding new stuff. And they're taking some of the old showings and moving on with those too. And looking at them more, drilling them more closely. You got Matador. Right now, we have about five companies right now that have 1 million ounce deposits that I see. You have Matador down the south coast. You have the boys at Big Ridge down at Hope Brook. You have Valentine, obviously, that's the big one, 5, 6, 7. I think it could be 10 million ounces the way it's going, because they're still finding stuff. So Maritime out at Kings Point and Newfoundland. So, a few years ago, I mean, our biggest deposit really up until Valentine was the Pine Cove deposit. It's about, and the Nugget Pond deposit, about both of 250,000 ounces.
Wow.
So, it just shows what's potential. And as you know, we're drilling with Sokoman now. We're drilling down on the south coast, and we're drilling a silica zone that's 12 kilometers long. And we drilled 5 holes over 4 kilometers, and every one of those holes hit gold. Nobody'd ever drilled before. Now, we don't know it's a mine yet. We can't say that, of course, but that's where we're drilling. I'm not sure we're started yet. This is Sokoman now, whether we started right yet, but we are planning. If it isn't, we're just about ready to start there.
Well, and going back to Eric Sprott, just one of the reasons I'm doing these podcasts is I just think this is a fabulous jurisdiction with so much potential and so many resources, and everybody should just know about it. And but it was Eric. I was talking to him one day, and he said, "You have to talk to Tim at Sokoman. He's a really good guy." And so I ended up connecting with Tim. He's been on the podcast, but amazing. And he's introduced me to people and made suggestions, but amazing talent in the jurisdiction, and completely underappreciated across central Canada, I think.
I think that's again that's a function of where we are. My experience in central Canada has been probably driven primarily by my association with the PDAC, because if it hadn't been for that, and you mentioned the Mining Hall of Fame and things like this, these situations would not have happened if I hadn't been involved with PDAC, and that's the way it is. Tim and I've worked with Tim 3 or 4 times in my career. He worked across there. I was working with him then. I worked with Cornerstone. He worked with Cornerstone around the same time. So we've crossed paths. And I guess, as Tim probably told you, he was the one that found the first gold at the Valentine Lake deposit. Yeah, I've actually landed there when we went going by one day in a helicopter, and he said, "You want to land on the Discovery Hub?" I said, "Yes, I would." And I actually walked around that day picking up small pieces of quartz with visible gold in about that size, and I filled 2 rock bags of the quartz tourmaline pyrite, QTPs. No, was it quartz? QTP, I think they call it, with visible gold in it. So it's interesting when you go and you've worked with people that long, right? And Tim invited me to be on the board of Sokoman. I said, "Well, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. I know I like what you're doing, and I like how you're doing it. So why not?" And of course, we got lucky. I mean, we got lucky in the first hole. But Tim drilled it in the right place. And the bottom line was, why did he drill it there? Well, there was I think an Altius hole there that has 0.5 meter, but it was really high grade, 200 grams or something. So you drill, that's not a bad place to drill, right? Yeah. But nobody else had drilled it.
so much potential, and other lithium as well.
Yeah, well, the lithium, again, that's serendipity. That's an example about how you shouldn't do. You shouldn't say too much when you don't know much about it. I did an interview a year ago, February, with CBC, 15-minute interview, and Ted Blades. One of the questions he asked me was critical metals, because he got into that towards the end of the discussion. Critical metals, what about things like, well, lithium and things like that? I said, well, you know, rare earths. I said, yeah, Labrador. I especially searched minerals there on the coast of Labrador, the Straits. I think that's probably one of the best rare earth deposits in Canada. You know, and it needs to be developed, as far as I see. But he said, what about lithium? And I said, you know, there's little bits of lithium around, a bit of spodumene here and there, especially in the Strait Shores, we call it, in between Gambo and Gander. But I said, you know, I really don't think there's a heck of a lot of potential for lithium in Newfoundland. And of course, last year, all of a sudden, I had to eat my words. But, you know, but that's, and I should know better, because I've been in this province long enough to know that we just don't know what's there.
Yeah.
You know. So but it is one of those things. You know, we're drilling on the lithium. We just announced some more results there. You know, on some of the new stuff, on some of the trenching we've done. It's got a good possibility there. You know, I mean, it's early days. We certainly can't say we've got a deposit by any means. But the fact we found significant spodumene crystals in these pegmatite dikes means that nobody else had found them. Now, the pegmatite dikes were known, but nobody had sampled them for lithium. So it just, and again, that's probably a function, one, of the time, and two, of the ability to actually analyze for lithium, and with the packages that were available at the time the work was done. So you can't blame people on that sort of thing. So,
you know, I have a prediction, and here's where you maybe, like, I should take your advice and not say anything. So, but I'm going to make a prediction. Hard times are coming. You can't print money forever and not expect inflation to follow. You know, Milton Friedman 101 from the 70s. Hard times are coming, and hard times need hope. And, you know, in the 1850s, it was the California gold rush. In the 1890s, it was Yukon and Alaska. You know, places like Newfoundland and Labrador are going to be the hope in hard times, and have the people that are going to be able to survive hard times. You know, they've proven it. And I think the time is coming for jurisdictions like this. And I think it's important to tell that story as it emerges, right? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, you know, we can go on forever, but I don't think we can with all this money printing.
Well, I go back just for example to the typical junior sector. When we staked that what is now the Queensway North property, 1998. We had companies in there. We had United Krinor. Newfoundland is the sixth company we had in on that property, and they optioned it in 2016. They drilled that hole in 2019. So that's how long it took. But what happened? We had some good companies in there before. Joey Freeze was in there with Candente. In the second group we had United Krinor was in there, the first company. They were only there a year, but again, I think they spent 600 or 700 or 800 grand or something. So, but again, they didn't get the results enough to raise more money. Candente was there for 3 or 4 years, and they were not just on our property. They were down south, in looking at a number of the properties in what's now the Queensway South. So they were a little more widespread. But then they saw greener pastures in Peru, so they went there. Then we had Rubicon, Garfield McVeigh. Garfield was very impressed with it. Of course, Garfield's now in Alaska with his things, Constantine. But they liked it so much that they spun off Paragon as a Newfoundland gold play. Now again, then we hit those bad times. You couldn't raise money. You couldn't do anything. So it went on. Paragon had the JBP property, we had rights to some of it, but we had staked it and we'd optioned it to them and things, but we retained some of the stuff around the two main showings around that area. But again, they couldn't raise money. The last company that drilled on the Keats Zone on the Queensway North, what's now Queensway North, was Paragon, and their partner was Sprott Gold. I don't know what Eric even knows that or not, but that zone was known. It was probably 300 meters long, but I mean, didn't have, the biggest grade, I think it was 17 grams over 1.5 meters or something, which isn't a bad intersection, but unless it's continuous, you don't go. And again, they ran out of money. And I think the gold price dropped at the same time, right? Which is typical. And that's typical for the junior sector. Unfortunately, I can see the same things, getting back to what you're saying. I can see that, unfortunately, going back. So some of the juniors that are in the plays now are probably going to have tough time continuing, because it isn't cheap, especially if you've got 300, 400, 500 claims to maintain those, especially when money gets tight. Flow through, you'll probably already be able to raise some money and flow through, but the hard dollars come. Very, very difficult to do it. And you need those to survive also. So I think the gold mining potential in Newfoundland is huge. As I just mentioned, the five companies or 5 properties with at least 1 million ounces of gold. I think that's good, and I think the government recognizes that potential and is working with the industry to try and bring that forward. But I think the exploration side has more to contribute and will contribute more. I still don't think most people in Newfoundland really even know what's going on in the gold sector. And I think these type of things that you're doing can help that, because people need to know what's out there. I tell people all the time, I play badminton with guys and tell them about the gold out in central Newfoundland, because they haven't heard anything about it. They know nothing about it.
Wow.
So, it's not in the press. It'll be once in a while, there'll be something in there, but it just like it's not anywhere. They don't treat it as being an important thing. And that's, unfortunately, that's the way it's been for a lot. And that's not much different than anywhere across Canada, mind you. But,
yeah, agree. And when I say hard times are coming, I mean, also collectively in the economy, I think gold's going to be fine. With inflation, and the price of gold will help drive the money. But I think you're right. The model in the sector is going to change. It's hard for a lot of the smaller companies to raise money. But I think gold will carry the jurisdiction into the future and discovery of many other commodities.
I think so too. Yeah, I agree.
And I'm going to eat my words when I go back a year from now and listen to myself.
No, I like I said, it is something that's for the future. We've been saying, you mentioned some of the things that the other companies things that I've worked with, the mining in L, which used to be Chamber of Mineral Resources and stuff. I was the chairman. I was the executive director. I was various things over the years and stuff. Same thing when I was in New Brunswick. I was president of the NBPDA. New Brunswick Prospectors and Developers Association. Of course, I was involved with the PDAC. Oh, I'm still involved with the PDAC as a past president. So my job has always been, the way I see it anyway, is to really tell people about Atlantic Canada, not just Newfoundland, but Nova Scotia, New Brunswick also. And I hesitate saying about PEI, but they unfortunately don't have a lot of potential. They may have some copper potential, mind you, so I won't take that away from them. But on the mineral side anyway. But there is huge potential. There's a new gold zone being found just north of Bathurst by Puma Minerals, which sounds a lot like what we're dealing with here. And again, it's structurally related along the Rocky Brook Millstream Break. Why was it called the Rocky Brook Millstream Break? Because it's a major structural zone, right? And only now, last 2 years, Puma Minerals is finding these things. Now, what did they do? They auctioned it from a prospector who had found the mineralization first.
Wow.
And I unfortunately, I don't know his name right now because I hope to see him at PDAC, and I didn't. But, that is what's driving us, and that will continue to drive us. Nova Scotia has some great potential. Biggest problem in Nova Scotia is the political situation. They're a green province, and while I think we all have to look after the environment, and that we also have to be realistic about it. We have to have jobs for people. We have to do things right when we do create mines and that. But you can't have a mine without creating some environmental damage. It just doesn't happen. You just have to minimize it, and you have to mitigate it, and you try to recover it after the fact. So, but it can be done everywhere, and I think that is the future for Atlantic Canada, not only Newfoundland.
Yeah, I watched a video. An interview that you did where you talked about environmental impact and people needing to understand the value of mine. And I loved your comparison to what if somebody, and they're looking back at history. They're not looking at the 50 years of advancement that we've made. And I see that in the nuclear industry as well. They're all looking back at the 70s. Meanwhile, it's an efficient source of power. I loved your analogy too. What if somebody built a city on a community on an ocean and dumped the sewage into the water?
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be awful? Oh, yes, that'd be awful. Well, that's what we did. It's not what we do anymore. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That is unfortunate. We tend to look back on a lot of things and think things haven't changed if we don't know anything about it. And as I just said, people don't know anything about it. The only time they hear about it, for example, I think the last thing about one of the things was when the Gullbridge tailing dam failed, way upstream and above South Pond and in central Newfoundland. They were handing out bottled water way down below South Pond, and I don't think anything ever would have got into their water supply. But this is what happens with it, right? So, and it should never have failed. But I mean, again, unfortunately, that was a mine that was abandoned in the 80s, right? So,
sensationalism sells with the media. They don't, having a nice mine that employs 100 people and creates a community and wealth doesn't sell papers, right?
That's right.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I think that the mining industry, which includes exploration, is the best wealth creator in rural Canada of all sectors. It's what drew me into it. It's sustainable jobs, transferable skills. It's the best, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is the future for a lot of these areas. You don't find mines. It's interesting, though. Having said that, there's a really good system of low sulfidation gold potential right here in St. John's, out on Steep Nap Road. Beautiful vein.
What does that mean? Low sulfidation.
Low sulfidation would be things like how do you describe them? They're these bonanza grade type things. Like they're mining in Japan right now, like a lot of the ones in South America. They're high level. When they talk about epizonal in the Fosterville style, what they're saying is high level mesothermal, which were fairly deep seated deposits. The low sulfidation systems and even the high sulfidation systems, they're very close to surface. They're actually sort of marginal to volcanoes. So they're very close to surface, and means that for the most part, they're in areas where volcanism is still going. So like Japan, like South American stuff in the Andes and that sort of thing. But they're very high grade. That's the big thing. You have bonanza zones that you get in where you're getting these little bands of native gold going right through them and things. So the one in Japan is 8 million ounces and counting. And it's in rocks that are 2 million years old, so very young. Where it's interesting because in Newfoundland, our Avalon zone, we're actually seeing similar zones in 580 million year old rocks. So, but what's happened is they got buried. Now they're brought back to surface. So we're at what we call the paleo surface.
Okay.
So it's a different thing. So, but there's one there just in St. John's. There was a hole drilled in what is now a subdivision. And there's some beautiful rocks. You come to St. John's, go to the Geo Center, and I can show you rocks that we got because I was part of the Geo Center team getting rocks, and I specifically got some from there because it just looks so good, right? But there's gold mineralization there, but it's now under subdivision, right?
Wow.
It'd never be mined. So, but I mean, that's fair enough. You can't have a mine everywhere, no matter what it is. And there was never ever a mine defined as such. It was just mineralization, which might have been. And there's still potential in that area outside of where the subdivision is to have something done. And there are still people working on that. So we'll see.
Wow. I realize that we've been talking a long time. And I haven't even hit half the stuff I want to talk to you about. So I'm wondering if we should talk again.
Well, it's up to you. I certainly can. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
There's one thing that you said that is I think an extended conversation. What did you say, that when you were in school or when you started in the industry, go out into the field for extended periods of time, and that was just part of it. You got married on a Saturday, you were back in the kitchen on Monday. But that's not how it works anymore, and that's an extended conversation I think we need to have, because the future of the industry is it has to get back to that.
Yeah, and that is true. Yes, because Newfoundland's a good example. I mean, the guys are 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. And people have to have proper lives. You can't do that. I mean, even then it's tough, but that's not unusual in a lot of industries now. But at least we've caught up with the other industries that did it for a long time. None of these things are being in for a month and then being out for 2 weeks or a week or something like that, right? So yeah, no, you've got to. You're just not going to get good people into it, or you're going to burn them out and they'll leave. So
yeah. And then, but I want to talk about, how does artificial intelligence fit into this? How does the database? So much stuff, and we haven't even talked about Rambler.
No problem. I'm willing anytime, Janet. No problem.
Oh, thanks, Peter. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed myself, and I really appreciate your time. And look.
No problem. As I said, I'm semi-retired, working harder than ever.
Good for you. That's you love what you do. Why stop, right?
Well, my aim now is to find the next gold mine in Newfoundland. So that's what I'm working towards.
Good one. I love it. I love it. Well, thanks. We're going to do this again.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we've been. I've been drinking water to keep up with you, but
I think I should do some of that myself.
You just go and go. Thank you, and thanks everyone for joining us. And Peter is coming back again, but thank you for your time today, and please join us again at Kissing the Cod. Thank you.
It was enjoyable. I always like going back over past things. Some good, some bad, but that's the industry.
Yeah, I hear you 100%. But stay tuned, more to come.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.